Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Riane Eisler. Thanks, Riane, for joining me.
Pleasure to be with you.
So I wanted to introduce you first. I mean, you've done so much. It's really quite amazing. You're a social scientist, an attorney, an author on cultural transformation, an activist leader in the peace movement, as well as around caring. You're a speaker at work and do workshops, and you're also the author of the Real Wealth of Nations, creating a caring economics, and
And yes,
and also you have a website. It's the Center for Partnership Studies. So that's partnershipway.org, and you have your website also, RianeEisler.com. So those are two resources that people can connect with you on. So what we wanted to talk about is really what is the relationship of empathy and caring, and how do we create a culture of empathy and caring? So that's our topic for the next 20 minutes or so.
well, how do we do that? We do it through human agency. That's the only way that we have seen change toward human rights, towards greater consciousness, and yes, towards greater empathy. And you know, the book that I'm best known for actually is one you didn't mention. It's The Chalice and the Blade, which is now in 25 languages, most European languages, as well as, Chinese, Japanese, Urdu, you name it, Korean, Arabic, and so on. And that was the first book that really I wrote for a general readership about my findings about what kind of culture, because that's the question for our future, what kind of culture will support rather than inhibit our capacities for empathy, for caring, for creativity, rather than, because we also have those capacities, for insensitivity, cruelty, violence. And my research, my multidisciplinary cross-cultural research, has basically sought answers to this. And I did this by really getting past, Einstein said that you can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them. And so I found very early in my research that the conventional categories of right versus left, or religious versus secular, or Eastern versus Western, or capitalist versus socialist, or northern versus southern, really don't tell us that, because you just think about it, societies in all these categories have been repressive, regressive, violated human rights, and so on. And I found that one of the reasons is that if you look at our human possibilities, which is what my work's about, through these old lenses, they fail to take into account the most fundamental and formative human relations, how those are socially constructed. And by this, I mean the relations between the female and male half of humanity, and between them and their daughters and sons. And when you take those into account, you begin to see that there are configurations, and there were no names for these. So I called one the domination system, and that really, you have to compartmentalize at best, or suppress at worst, our capacity for empathy. But there is another possibility, what I call the partnership system.
Yeah, so you have a model where you have the kind of domination society and the partnership society, and basically you're saying that right now we have more the domination society, and that we need to get past all the isms, capitalism, communism, and all the other isms, to really focus on creating this partnership society, which is based on empathy and caring, and it's really about the relationships and how people are relating to each other, as I understand it.
Absolutely. And none of the old categories even ask that question, do they? I
Not
mean,
at all.
they don't address it at all. I mean, will relationships be based on mutual respect, mutual benefit, mutual accountability, and yes, caring, empathy, or will they be rigid rankings of domination, be it man over man, man over woman? That's a huge piece. Race over race, religion over religion, and so on. And that, as I said, was what you can only answer really by using the new lenses of the configurations of the partnership and domination systems. And I think we should really start with human evolution when we talk about empathy, don't you think?
Yeah, the how empathy evolved and through caring, I guess, is where you're heading.
Well,
Maternal caring, perhaps, and
right. Where I'm heading is that if you look at mammals, and probably it did start with the necessity, really, of a mammalian mother to have some empathy for her babies. But it went much, much more beyond that. We know, for example, from experiments with rats, that they will help rats that they know. We know from experiments with humans. For example, there was a wonderful experiment done at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, Felix Wernicke, and he did this experiment with little toddlers, where he would supposedly accidentally drop a book or he was hanging some clothes and have the clothespin and the clothes fall down. And if it looked like it was an accidental thing, not if he deliberately threw the book down, these little toddlers would toddle over to help. So this capacity to identify with the feelings, right, of another, that's really what empathy is about. But that's only a capacity. And we know that how behavior develops, how our brains develop really, is through the interaction of our genes with our environments. And for humans, the most important environments, of course, are cultural, as mediated first of all through families, of course also through education, religion, politics, economics. So we know that people in these rigid rankings of top-down domination, they really can't have empathy for those below them, can they? Because otherwise, how could they suppress and dominate? So always you have to look at the culture. And in a domination system, our capacity for empathy really gets suppressed, dampened. And we see this, don't we, in cultures and subcultures that orient to that configuration.
So with the Max Planck study, I've seen that, and I've seen the video, which is online, and you can actually see that happening. So it's showing that children want to naturally contribute to the well-being. They want to, and to do that, they're empathizing with the person that dropped the clothespin or whatever. So in a sense, that's showing that there's this natural capacity of wanting to contribute and to empathize. And that you're saying, if I'm hearing it correctly, that the authoritarian social structure is suppressing that sense of empathy.
It isn't only the authoritarian social structure, because one of the key components of domination systems is also the rigid ranking of the male half of humanity over the female half. And with this, the devaluing of so-called feminine, soft traits and activities, and you've got it, such as caring, empathy, real men in that system, whether it's in Hitler's Germany or in Khomeini's Iran, whether it's in the Taliban of Afghanistan, Stalin's Soviet Union, real men are supposed to be tough and to not get those soft emotions get in the way, right? And of course, in a very rigid domination system, such as a Muslim fundamentalist system, honor, honor, right, is equated with control, starting with male control over the women and children in the home. And therefore, if a woman seems to violate that control, and is very much also a sexual control, the man is supposed to, and he will be helped by women in the family and brothers and and others who subscribe to this. He is justified according to this in killing that girl or woman. So you're really dealing with a pathological system, but by the logic of the system, that makes sense, doesn't it? So you have to not only consider authoritarian in the tribe or state, but in the family. And you also have to consider something else. Remember, I said that in domination systems, anything stereotypically associated with women, with the so-called feminine, and I say so-called because this is not about anything inherent in women or men, it's part of the culture, is devalued. So empathy, caring, caregiving are not at all supposed to be appropriate for, quote, real men, right? And they are devalued in social policy as well. Now, in the West, we have moved significantly to the partnership side. If we hadn't, we couldn't be having this conversation, right?
Yeah, in fact, I'm doing an interview with a woman in Pakistan, and she doesn't want to be videotaped because she doesn't want to be on camera, because she's on camera even with the veil. She's afraid of retaliation.
That's right. In these cultures, respect is really fear. And it starts in the family, you know. And you see, but let me just say something. This is not just a Muslim thing. This is, if you look at some of the parenting books, for example, by the so-called Christian right, like books called Parenting with God or Parenting God's Way, or, God is depicted as a sadist, and little 18-month-old babies are terrorized into sitting on high chairs with their hands folded in front of them. Well, the only way you do that is by frightening that child of terrible punishment, isn't it? Because it's totally unnatural. But that's domination systems, children learn two lessons. First, in that family, they learn to equate difference, beginning with the most fundamental difference in our species between male and female, with either dominating or being dominated, with either superiority or inferiority, with either being served or serving. And then they can generalize that to any other difference, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation. So it's not coincidental that there is a strong correlation between rigidly male-dominated families typical of cultures or subcultures that orient to the domination side, and also lots of prejudice against outgroups.
So the domination, I had said authoritarian, but you're saying it's more domination is the overall category, social category, and that really filters down through all parts of society, right down into the family, so that the family is kind of structured around domination. And you're mentioning evangelicals, which I actually grew up in an evangelical Christian family, so I'm kind of familiar with that way of being.
Well, the good news is that not everybody brought up in that kind of environment, and you're a good example, really identifies with it, but many people do. And this gendered system of values is huge. I mean, it really, you find that people who consider themselves very conservative, which I would say uh, is more aptly characterized as people who have this mindset of domination where there are only two alternatives. You either dominate or you're dominated, and you identify with the strong authority figure, usually the father in the family, although it could be a mother, but then her husband is supposed to be henpecked. It's supposed to be an abnormality. So these people vote. They have no trouble voting for punitive policies, prisons, or for weapons and wars, this so-called masculine thing. But somehow they can't seem to find money or think it's right or even moral to fund stereotypically soft, caring, activities, this so-called women's work, right? Of caring for children, of caring, of preschool education. I mean, right now there's this big argument about preschool education. And by the way, I just got back from Washington, D.C., where the Center for Partnership Studies Caring Economy campaign had a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill, which was wonderful. We had Congressman Jim Moran of Virginia do the introduction, and I was on the panel. So was Steve Barnett, who is the co-director of the National Institute for Research on Early Childhood Education, showing that really, not only from a human standpoint, but from a purely economic standpoint, investing in caring for people and in educating people starting in early childhood is the best investment a nation can make. And maybe we can talk about that a little later. But staying with with the different environments, you said that it filters down to the family. I would not say that. And I would say that it's an interactive process, and that on the contrary, what children learn in families is foundational.
So it's more of an interrelational. It's not like it just goes down from the top down, but that they support each other, the overall society and the family. There's like an interaction going on there. It's an interactive.
When you're dealing with complex systems, and social systems are complex systems, you can't really talk in terms of simple linear causes and effects. It's always what are the elements that support one another to maintain the character of the system. And domination systems have three core components as contrasted to partnership systems. One is this authoritarian top-down ranking in both the family and the state or tribe. The second is the rigid ranking of the male half of humanity over the female half, and with it, of anything stereotypically associated with masculinity and domination systems, toughness, violence, domination, over the so-called soft, feminine, etc. And the third is a socially condoned, even idealized high level of abuse and violence, because without it, ultimately, the system won't last. Whereas as you move to the partnership side, and it's always a matter of degree, it could be a tribal society like the Minangkabau. We had a little problem here, technical problem, but I want to say that in the domination system, as I said, you have to have this built-in, really socially condoned, even idealized, high level of abuse and violence to maintain ultimately these rankings of domination. But as you move to the partnership side, and it's always a matter of degree, whether it's a tribal society like the Terurai, or an agrarian society like the Minangkabau of Sumatra, or whether it is societies that actually are today in the forefront of the movement towards partnership, like Sweden, Finland, Norway. These are societies where there is more democracy and equality in both the family and the state, where the status of women is much higher, so that 40% of the national legislatures are female. And they're in the forefront of trying to leave behind traditions of domination and violence, including the fact that the first peace studies came from these societies. And this is not coincidental. We're talking about a configuration of mutually reinforcing elements.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're going to end right at this point, and then we're going to start. This is going to be one clip, and then we're going to pick up again in another clip, so it'll be part 2. Okay, so here we are again with Riane Eisler, and this is our second part of our interview, and we're talking about empathy and empathy and caring, how they relate. You know, we're kind of going over the domination society, and I want to go in a little bit more into empathy and caring, how the two relate, because in my quest of kind of understanding society and values, I've seen empathy as this core social value, and you're talking about caring as this core social value. And for me, I think we're actually on the same page here. We're actually talking about the same qualities. I'm wondering how do you see that with empathy and caring?
I think you're right that we are on the same page. And I think that you can feel empathy in terms of being able to identify with what the other is feeling. But unfortunately, that in itself does not guarantee that there will be caring. So we are to some extent on the same page, because I don't think that caring is really possible without some empathy. On the other hand, empathy alone is not enough, and there have actually been studies of psychopaths showing that some of the brain areas involved, you know, whether we call them mirror neurons, you know, there's a lot of controversy right now as to whether it's mirror neurons or other brain regions, but that they are capable of really understanding what the other is feeling, but it doesn't make any difference. On the contrary, they really enjoy inflicting pain. So caring...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So caring is the key, and that is very much really a matter of learning whether, I mean, you know, if you have genes that make somebody a psychopath, and who knows, I mean, there may be some genetic component here, that may be that. But for most people, there is the capacity for both empathy and caring, as the experiment with the toddlers, the Max Planck experiment we spoke about in an earlier session, indicates, and also other experiments indicate. For example, we know from neuroscience, and this is fascinating, that the pleasure centers of the brain light up more when people give rather than when they win. Okay? Well, giving is a way of caring, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So caring for me is the key, and the issue then always becomes, is that inhibited, compartmentalized by the culture? Is it associated with a subordinate, feminine way of being, right? You know, women are supposed to be caring, but men are supposed to be tough, which is part of the domination system values we've inherited.
So it's like a whole cultural framework there that these values are kind of being filtered through, in a sense.
They're not only being filtered through, but they are being taught to children even before their brains are fully developed, because we know from neuroscience that the human brain takes a long time to fully develop. What connections, synapses are formed, which ones are not formed. That really is very, very much dependent on what a child observes or experiences, in other words, learning.
Mhm.
And that's where the importance of the configuration of the domination system, whether it's Eastern or Western, Southern or Northern, rightist or leftist, capitalist or socialist, and so on, comes in versus the configuration of the partnership system. And I want to say something very important here. By partnership system, I do not mean just working together. People work together all the time in domination systems. Monopolies work together, terrorists work together, invading armies work together, nor does it mean a completely flat organization. There are hierarchies, but we need a whole new vocabulary. So I've coined the terms of hierarchies of domination. We all know those. You better obey orders,
Mhm.
or, in a very rigid domination system, you're killed, right? Or else, terrible suffering, or a hierarchy of actualization, where accountability, respect, benefit doesn't just flow from the bottom up, but both ways. And where power, and this really goes back to the title of my book, The Chalice and the Blade, where power is not symbolized by the blade, that's the power, right? To
Mhm.
dominate, to destroy, to take life, but by the chalice, which since prehistory really has been associated with the power to give life, to nurture life, to illuminate life. And the fact that we're today talking about leaders and managers empowering others shows that, at least in some world regions and in some culture, aspects of our culture, we're moving to the partnership side. So we don't have to start from square one, really. But
Yeah,
there
if I
are.
could just, no, if I just mentioned, you're talking about, what type of working together, and that's something that relates with change. I hear change. Well, we have to do change all the time. And for me, it's like, what kind of a change? Is it an empathic change, or is it a domination change? Because everybody's talking about change. So having that clarity about what type of change we're wanting, I think, is really important. Or what
you,
kind of collaboration? Is it a domination collaboration, or is it I call it empathic, or you're saying caring collaboration?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that point up, because change is a constant. I mean, plants grow and they die. We humans, age and we die. Social systems change. The question is, as you said, what direction will the change take? And that's where human agency comes in, because cultures are human creations, economic systems, values. They really are functions of what we humans want to be the governing rules and values. So in my most recent book, The Real Wealth of Nations, the subtitle is Creating a Caring Economics. I really take that on about our job is not just to have alternatives on the margins, as important as these are, because they are models, aren't they, for more partnership orienting, and many of them, some of them are not. But that our job is to see to it that we change the structures and the rules of the game. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why we at the Center for Partnership Studies have launched our Caring Economy campaign. And why we are working on what we call social wealth economic indicators, which really measure what GDP leaves out, the enormous not only human and environmental value, but economic value of the work of caring for people starting in early childhood and caring for our natural environment. And I invite viewers to go to caringeconomy.org. We just had a briefing in Washington, D.C., a congressional briefing on this, and I invite you to join the Caring Economy Coalition. And also, we have a wonderful online Caring Economy Leadership Training Program. So check that out. We also have other online classes, by the way, and I am now giving a class on cultural transformation, just what you're talking about. Fundamental change from domination to partnership, which we're winding down now. It's the third of 4 sessions, but I'll be doing it again soon. So check that out too. And
so there's a lot of, if I can just interrupt here, there's a lot of resources about your overall vision. It's just incredibly well articulated and laid out. I mean, especially in your book, the one thing I thought we could maybe spend a little bit more time on is on the relationship of empathy and compassion, since the work I'm doing is so focused on really exploring the nature of empathy. And what I was hearing, and I wanted to mention about, you're saying that a psychopath can have empathy, and that one problem we have is like a problem with definitions and understandings, that there's so many different definitions of empathy. And I thought maybe I could just lay out kind of a definition of empathy that I'm using, just to get your response to that.
Please.
If that would work. So, this is like, I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of the experts, academics about empathy, and I've been trying to put it together into kind of a model that what I call is the wheel of empathy, the wheel and feel of empathy. So it begins with what I would call self-empathy, which is sensory awareness of just what's going on inside of ourselves. So, practices like yoga, mindfulness, whatever, just get us more in tune with the felt sense that's inside of our body. And then if we're fearful, our body constricts and we don't kind of take in so much, from others and outside. But when we're open, kind of connected to ourselves and aware, that we're open for what I call mirrored empathy, which is through mirror neurons, that when we see an action and do an action, the same neurons fire. So as my hands kind of wave here, and you see my hands wave, your neurons are also firing, and you can kind of feel the level of enthusiasm, kind of what's going on with me. You can really kind of feel a sense of my emotional state, as well as maybe my intentions as well, through that mirrored empathy. If you were highly fearful, you might not, really feel and be attuned. Then the next part of empathy is an imaginative empathy. The academics call it perspective taking or cognitive empathy, which is that as we see that we're separate beings and have that sense of self-awareness, we realize that someone can have a different perspective from our perspective. And that's kind of where that metaphor of, looking through someone else's eyes, standing in someone else's shoes kind of come in, that we can kind of put ourselves in their position and, kind of like an actor take on the role of how it would be to be that person. With that, the fourth part would be empathic creativity or action, that when we really attune to each other, that we're kind of like those little kids you were talking about, who see someone in need, that they care about, and they want to, it's almost like an automatic instinctual desire to contribute to their well-being that just kind of arises. And so that's kind of like a framework, a wheel, a model of empathy. And then there's the feel of empathy. Just what does it feel like in your body when you kind of resonate and feel someone else? And so when you're talking about the psychopath has empathy, what the psychopath has is has that kind of cognitive empathy. And I've interviewed a psychopath who says, for him, empathy is like a dry library full of facts and books, that there's like no humanity in it, that they've got this model of how things work, and they're just thinking about themselves. They're not really having that felt sense of the other and really wanting to contribute with empathy, contribute to their well-being. So I'm just kind of wondering how that kind of model kind of works.
Well, I think it's a very good model. I would add some things to it.
Yeah.
Going back to the mindfulness. You know, children who grow up in dominator families really cannot be mindful because it's too painful. I mean, the people who say they love them and who demand the children's love are hurting them, are humiliating them. So you cannot be mindful. What these kids very often tend to do then is to identify, I mean, the experiments show this, by the way. Else Frankel Brunswick's work goes way back. They identify with the punitive power figure, right? Which is then, of course, taken over into how they vote. You know, so it's not coincidental that in societies, for example, in much of the Middle East, in Egypt, in Gaza, where you still have a very rigid dominator family, people will vote for Hamas or for the Muslim Brotherhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just what they're used to. Democracy doesn't necessarily mean what we think it ought to mean. Okay, and there are many people in our culture, in the Western culture, still subcultures that do that. You know, as I said, they have no trouble finding money for these, you know, control, for prisons, for weapons, for wars, but somehow they can't find money for the soft, for the stereotypically feminine, for the caring. So I would start.
Can I just reflect what I'm hearing so far? Is that there's people, if in a dominator society, that you're kind of cut off from your sense of connection. So as a child is growing up in that environment, they can't really attune to their own self because they're kind of like cut off from connection with.
Well, it's because it's too painful to recognize that these people who are being so awful to them are not. I mean, the kid blames herself or himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And has to suppress the anger, has to suppress. Because, you know, they depend on these people to survive, for goodness sakes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I'd add. But going all the way over to some of the other aspects, I think that in domination systems, what you often find is not only the suppression of empathy, but the compartmentalization of empathy. So people feel empathy for their in-group. Okay? But they don't feel empathy. I mean, how could you feel empathy? Say you're in a Southeast Asian family where boys are fed more than little girls, okay? I mean, it's just a fact. They do it. Less health care, less food, etc., okay? Certainly less education. How can you feel empathy for that little girl then? Do you see what I'm saying? And mothers, are so identified with those in control, namely men and the male preference, that they will compartmentalize their empathy and they'll even sell that little girl into sexual slavery so that they can get an education for their son.
So you're what you're addressing is we have this empathy. There's things that can suppress the empathy, or like you can shut down the empathy. You know, it can be from you're explaining why if you're in a domination society, so you're not seen, you feel maybe alone and painful, and that you kind of end up that your own self connection gets suppressed as well.
I'm not so sure.
No?
That it is just your own self-connection. This is the point I'm trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
I think that children in these families do learn to really go into denial, okay, about what's really happening. It's justified, well, she's just a girl, or whatever, or they're just Jews, and therefore it's okay if we wipe Israel off the map, etc., okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or vice versa, where we can deny here when we, go to war against a country that there's evidence that we shouldn't have, as happened with the war in Iraq. But the thing about it is that it isn't just lack of connection with yourself. It's a pattern acquired early on by the brain. That's the point that I'm trying to make, of that's why I said I'd like to add to your model
Yeah.
these two things. I mean, one, what happens in childhood, what they observe or what they experience, and two, that it isn't just the suppression of empathy, it's the compartmentalization so that you can feel it for some but not for others.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've heard about so-called, uh, uh, compassionate conservatives who have a lot of empathy for people in their in-group, but somehow don't seem to have it for those so-called exploitive welfare mothers, these women who basically are trying very hard to feed themselves and their children, right?
Yeah, so so that empathy can be blocked and be kept to your in-group, and it's not going to those, who are kind of outside of that in-group.
That's right.
So the question for me is that's why I call it a culture of empathy, because for me the culture of empathy is to expand that empathic connection with everyone and nature and.
But that's another element that I think I would really urge you to put in. What is really the cultural message about empathy and caring? And if you still value the stereotypically, and I emphasize stereotypically, has nothing to do with anything inherent in women or men, but if real men are supposed to, above all things, not to be like a woman, and empathy, caring, sensitivity is associated with the so-called inferior feminine, then you've had it, haven't you? And even women will then really devalue empathy and caring.
Yeah, so it's like, how do we have
cultural.
men? Yeah, it's a cultural kind of demeaning of empathy, that men have to be strong and kind of closed off and not empathize, and there's like this cultural norm. And it's really, for me, it's like, how do we, change that norm? Because, men, I think, are just as capable as women of being
Precisely.
empathic. If we just kind of nurture those values and support it.
And some women are not empathic. They will not be empathic to the outgroup. They've been taught that. And they will even identify, I mean, look at the Phyllis Schlaflys.
Yeah.
Or the Sarah Palins. They do everything to distance themselves from this stereotypically feminine stuff, right? So we really, again, as I say, it's not men against women or women against men. It's about, look, if you rank male and so-called masculine over female and so-called feminine, then you really have a culture where caring, empathy, nonviolence, which are stereotypically associated not with those in control, okay, but with the subordinates, it will not be valued, and it will not be part of social and economic policy. And that's really what I'm working on, is to make this what's been invisible, because people don't like to talk about gender, right? We're uncomfortable. But let's remember what the great sociologist Lewis Worth, excuse me. He said that the most important things about a society are those that people are uncomfortable talking about. We saw it about race. We started to talk about it. Things started to move a little bit forward. And we see it with gender, so we've got to talk much more about gender. And that's what I'm suggesting to you, that you weave that into your model.
Well, for me, yeah, with the gender part, I see values as like going beyond gender. That I don't see. I mean, I know the culture itself is saying, a man should not be so empathic, and women, that empathy is this women. But it doesn't seem to me that that's accurate. The accuracy is that we're all capable, equally capable of empathy.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Forgive me for interrupting. I think
please.
You're mishearing me. I am not saying that men are not capable of it. I am saying that if we don't look at what exists now, which is a
Mm.
gendered system of values. If we don't
Mm-hmm.
deconstruct that and make it visible, then we can talk about caring and empathy all we want, but we are not going to change the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So how do you see changing that dynamic? Because I have a story, like in my family, is that evangelical Christian, fundamentalist environment that I grew up, and kind of growing up in that whole environment. And for me, during the 60s, I kind of became the rebel, standing
Yes.
up, getting influenced by the 60s and so forth. And then I did a lot of traveling, which really led me down a different path, and then seeing the importance of empathy. And I used to be in conflict all the time with my family, right? But now I just try to empathize with them, because it's like I found I can't fight them because it doesn't work. All I'm doing is nurturing that way of being, and now I just empathize with them. And I mean, it's like there's this real connection kind of happening, that we need to do what it is that we want, kind of, that be the change. If I want an empathic culture, I got to try to empathize with them, and it's been, it's actually been working. It's really quite
Well,
amazing.
I think it does work. I would say this, though. I'm not a subscriber to cultural relativism, and I think that we always have to have human rights standards. To just have no standards, and I'm not saying that you don't, because you obviously do.
Hmm.
So I would separate your relationship with your family from your position about the culture, which is a dominator culture.
Hmm.
Because certainly, if you make people defensive, they're just going to hang on more. Uh, but there are some people, such as you, who, when they are exposed to another possibility other than dominating or being dominated, right? Which is the old,
Hmm.
dominator way, who flourish. And so you want to do both. You want to expose maybe some of the younger ones to another possibility.
Yeah, I really hear you on the relativism, because I'm like, I don't go subscribe to that either, because relativism says, oh, everything's okay, and it's just kind of, it doesn't really matter, the attitude. But I'm coming at it from, I am firmly standing for empathy as a social value. I am here, I am present, I am standing for empathy. I don't believe in relativism, which is just kind of like an indifference of sorts. That I am firmly, committed to fostering empathy, and that we need to actually transform the whole social structure to be supportive of empathy, which is kind of what your work, very, very systems thinking work is about.
Absolutely. And my work is global. And
Hmm.
I want to say one last thing, which is that we have, of course, as I said, as a major project of the Center for Partnership Studies, the Caring Economy campaign, but we also have our work to really end traditions of violence against women and children in families. Why? Because what do children learn? They learn when they observe or experience that violence that it's all right, it's acceptable and even moral to use violence to impose your will on
Hmm.
others. So I invite you and our audience to go to another website, which is partnershipway.org, and look for the Spiritual Alliance to Stop Intimate Violence. And why a spiritual alliance? Because unfortunately, so much in earlier, more dominator-oriented religious tradition has condoned and even commanded violence against women and children, right? So it's very important that spiritual leaders, religious leaders in particular, but other spiritual leaders as well, like the Dalai Lama, I would love to get to take a strong stand against this intimate violence. Because frankly, as I have said, intimate violence and national and international violence are as tightly bound together as the fingers of a clenched fist.
Hmm.
And again, if children learn this, we're not going to have that more peaceful empathic world. Because how can you have empathy, really, if you either stand by, accept, condone, or inflict that kind of pain, even death?
Yeah, those actions are not empathic. Yeah.
So I urge you to also consider these matters, and I think we've run out of time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Riane. It's a wonderful chatting with you and kind of exploring this topic. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time. I know you're like super busy and you have so many things you're doing. And so thank you for taking this time to chat with me and our audience.
It's been a pleasure, and I really want to congratulate you on the important work that you're doing.
And likewise, I hope we keep the conversation going as well. It's we can always do more of these or do some panels or something online if that opportunity arises. Now that we've got it all set up, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.